Y ahora sí, nos vamos con otro tema que involucra a Donald Trump y es ese anuncio extraterrestre, ese rumor viral que sacude Internet, de momento sin pruebas oficiales, pero que en las últimas semanas Internet se ha llenado de rumores sobre un supuesto gran anuncio de Donald Trump relacionado con los objetos voladores no identificados y de vida extraterrestre. Vamos a repasar cómo está afectando y de qué está hablando este discurso UFO de Donald Trump que se viraliza. Pues bien, el rumor nace de una fuente no verificada difundida por un cineasta británico. No existe de momento ninguna confirmación oficial por parte de la Casa Blanca, no hemos visto que Donald Trump se pronuncie hasta la fecha sobre este asunto, pero sí que la fecha mencionada del 8 de julio coincide con el aniversario de Roswell, algo que nos puede indicar igual alguna pista sobre el tema, que ya se ha viralizado en redes sociales pese a la falta de las pruebas. Pero el interés público sigue sonando y sigue con el foco sobre todo por los WAP, que crece, pero sin evidencia concluyente. El discurso de UFO que mantiene en el foco a los ciudadanos estadounidenses y que todo parte de declaraciones de ese cineasta británico que asegura haber recibido información de una fuente interna sobre un posible discurso histórico en el que Trump confirmaría la existencia de materiales no humanos y abriría la puerta a una gran desclasificación de los archivos. El problema es que hasta ahora no existe una confirmación oficial. La Casa Blanca no ha anunciado ningún discurso, no hay pruebas documentadas y los propios medios de comunicación han difundido la historia que dice que la fuente no es verificada. La teoría ha ganado fuerza en redes sociales y en foros especializados, sobre todo porque los analistas y los observadores recuerdan que la historia se apoya más en una especulación que en evidencias contrastadas, pero hay numerosas pistas que nos dejan apuntar a que pueda ser un mensaje de Donald Trump. Mientras tanto, el interés público por los fenómenos aéreos no identificados sigue creciendo, alimentando los debates políticos y culturales, aunque figuras como el expresidente Barack Obama han reiterado recientemente que no vieron pruebas de contacto extraterrestre durante su mandato. Por ahora, el supuesto discurso es más un fenómeno viral que una noticia confirmada, pero sí que el simple hecho de que los rumores estén ganando tanta tracción refleja algo importante, y es que el debate sobre los fenómenos aéreos no identificados ha pasado del margen al centro de la conversación pública con todos los temas y asuntos que hay sobre la mesa en Estados Unidos. Este es uno de los que más se habla. Nos vamos directamente a poner más claridad sobre este asunto con nuestro siguiente invitado, con Avi Loeb, físico teórico de Harvard. Thank you, Avi, for being with us here at Negocios Televisión one more time.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Avi, public interest in UFOs and UAPs keeps growing in the United States and as well here. Do you think this reflects real scientific progress or mostly a cultural and social phenomenon amplified by media and politics?
Well, so far it appears to be cultural. I'm engaged in the scientific research trying to get new evidence for technological artifacts near Earth that may have originated from another civilization. We have the Galileo project that built 3 observatories, one in Massachusetts, another one in Pennsylvania, a third one in Nevada. We're collecting data on millions of objects in the sky and using artificial intelligence to figure out if any of them are outliers that lie outside the performance envelope of human-made technologies. This is the scientific method, and my hope is that more people will adopt it. And of course, the interest in the public comes from governments saying that there are objects they cannot identify, and former President Obama referred to that. He not only said that, but also quite affirmatively confirmed that he believes aliens are real. Now, I don't know why he made that statement. He also said that when he entered office, this was the first question in his mind. And, it's possible that he's preparing the ground for a more substantive announcement, perhaps by President Trump. I don't know anything about that. I haven't seen any such information or evidence. And until they show us the evidence, we shouldn't believe what people are talking about, because it's all about the evidence. You know, when I listened to former President Obama, I asked, where is the beef? You know, where is the substance? We haven't seen that. And so as of now, it's just talk. But on the other hand, it may indicate that they will eventually tell us something that would be quite substantial, and they are preparing the ground for that.
Avi, if governments were to officially acknowledge evidence of non-human technology one day, what would be the biggest scientific and societal consequences in your view?
Well, there would be a huge impact. First of all, on the public psychology. You know, it could have an impact on financial markets, because if we realize that we are being visited by another civilization, then there are questions about safety, about security, that have nothing to do with what humans are doing to other humans. You know, that's our geopolitics is shaped by interactions among humans. And if suddenly there is a potential risk from some other entity that is beyond Earth, of course, it puts the sense of safety into question, and so there would be some unrest and some worries, concerns, but also a lot of scientific questions about what the technologies are, where do they come from, what does it imply about our place in the universe, are they far more advanced than we are? How long has this been going on? What did it do to our own history? And so there are lots of questions to be answered. But I think the first concern of any politician or policymakers is not to create too much panic, because that would disrupt social order. And so perhaps the strategy for minimizing disruption is to slowly bring the public to the notion that things like that may exist out there, and so they're doing it slowly and gradually by comments of the type that former President Obama made. But I think ultimately it really depends on the details. And you know, when you meet a visitor, you can't develop a general prophecy about what the meeting will be like unless you know the qualities of the visitor and what the intent of the visitor is, and what are the signatures of the interaction, and so forth. So it all depends on the details. And the response of the public will reflect those details. And since I don't know them, you know, I cannot really guess what the impact would be, but it's definitely the most important discovery ever made by humanity. I mean, we do know that we are not at the center of the universe for, you know, about 400 years or so, since the time of Kepler, Copernicus and Galileo, but that is not as disruptive as the notion that there is someone intelligent out there, because you know, we are now developing artificial intelligence systems that may surpass our own cognitive abilities. But these are our own technological kits. They are in principle under our control. It's very different if you realize that you have a visitor into your home that might bring intelligence superior to ours, and you know, it would change everything for us.
You often argue that science should investigate anomalies more openly. What kind of data or evidence would actually convince the scientific community that we are not alone?
Yeah, so obviously a very high-resolution photograph of an object that looks artificial and definitely not human-made would be conclusive evidence. And we can get such a photograph, for example, of an interstellar object, an object that originated from outside the solar system, flying near Earth. And there were a few such objects discovered recently over the past decade. The first one was Oumuamua, was very strange in its properties, but we didn't have a high-resolution image. The most recent one is 3I Atlas. Again, we didn't have a high-resolution image. So in principle, such an object a visitor from outside the solar system that behaves in ways that are strange, perhaps maneuvers, or we have a photograph, a close-up photograph of it that indicates that it's artificial, would definitely change the consensus in the scientific community. But in addition to that, there could be objects that are orbiting the Earth. And there again, what the Galileo project that I'm leading is trying to do is collect as much data on such objects to figure out whether they are indeed non-human made. And so at the end of the day, it all boils down to evidence data. If an object crashes on Earth, we can collect the materials. We can check if there are pilots. This is another opportunity to learn. And perhaps the US government has such materials or information. I simply don't know.
How should scientists balance skepticism with curiosity when discussing UAPs, especially at a time when social media can quickly blur the line between science and speculation?
Right. So it's whether we have a neighbor or not does not care about what humans think. You know, the consensus on Earth was that the Earth is at the center of the universe, even though for 4.5 billion years the Earth was orbiting around the sun, you know, and humans just had the wrong ideas, including the Vatican. That didn't affect the motion of the Earth around the sun. You know, it went around the sun 4.5 billion times, and it didn't really care that humans have the wrong ideas. The same is true about whether we have a neighbor. You know, that fact, if it's a fact of reality, it doesn't really depend on what social media say. And it's our duty as responsible scientists to find out the evidence that will prove one way or another. At the moment, you know, we invest a lot of funding in other scientific missions of, for example, finding what most of the matter in the universe is. It's called dark matter. We don't know what it is. We invested billions of dollars, haven't found it yet. There are all kinds of ideas that are being tested by investing billions of dollars. They're within the mainstream of science. And I think this subject should also deserve to be part of the mainstream of science, because it's completely reasonable to say, you know, we came from a soup of chemicals on this rock that we call the Earth. We know that there are billions of Earth-Sun analogs in the Milky Way galaxy, and that soups of chemicals similar to the one that was on early Earth existed there. We also know that the Sun is a relatively late star. It was formed only in the last 1/3 of cosmic history. So most of the stars formed billions of years before the Sun. And if there was another technological civilization, they have a head start relative to us, most likely, of billions of years. And it takes less than 1 billion years for Voyager, our own spacecraft from the 1970s, to cross the Milky Way galaxy. So there was plenty of time, even with all technologies that we employed in the 1970s, even with those technologies, you can actually bridge the gap among the stars within a time scale that it took our Sun to form after those other stars formed. So I would say that it's very reasonable for us to check and invest billions of dollars in the search, just like as we search for the nature of dark matter for billions of dollars. You know, this is a question that has huge impact, and it should be part of the mainstream of science, simply because the public cares so much about this question. It will have a huge impact on the future of humanity that it makes no sense to zero out the funding, the federal funding for such research. We should not just search for microbes, because, you know, when we go on a date, we should aim high rather than low. You can always search for things that are more common, that are less intelligent than we are, like microbes. But I argue that it will be much more impactful if we find a partner that is more intelligent than us, because it will bring us to a better place. So let's invest a similar level of funding, billions of dollars, in the search for technological signatures of other civilizations.
Do you think humanity is scientifically prepared for the possibility of discovering extraterrestrial intelligence, or are we still limited by our own assumptions and biases?
Yeah, so our current telescopes and observatories are searching for objects similar to the rocks or icebergs that we have seen in the solar system. It's possible we're missing a lot of objects. In fact, it's very likely that if there are objects that use technologies far beyond our rockets, the ones that we launched, that we are missing them because they would not be recorded as asteroids or comets because they move too fast or they are too faint. They would simply not be noticed by current astronomical observatories. So we might be missing the most advanced technologies of objects passing through the solar system or coming close to Earth. But we should start somewhere, and we should open our mind to the possibility that such objects exist, because insisting that everything is rocks and icebergs out there limits us from discovering something new. And that is my main criticism of comet experts who are basically refusing to discuss space objects that are technological, even though our own civilization produced a lot of such space objects near the Earth. And so we should be prepared to the notion that we are not at the top of the food chain, within the Milky Way galaxy, that there are things more advanced than us. And we should openly ask the question of whether they're out there. We were waiting for radio signals for 65 years, but that's just like waiting for a phone call. Radio communication is an old technology, not being used much today. And maybe there are things far more advanced that we're missing. So let's explore the sky and invest billions of dollars in the search, because it's an important search. And if we don't, at the end of the day, if we don't find anything, at least we know that we tried. But if we, in advance, decide that we know the answer in advance, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We won't find anything because we're not searching.
Maybe could the search for extraterrestrials life become one of the major scientific and geopolitical themes of the next decade, similar to the space race or artificial intelligence today?
That is my hope, and I believe it's very reasonable for us to pursue it in this way. We can find a higher level of intelligence either in the form of AI systems that we are producing. These are our technological kids. Already AI agents are performing better than most students in universities in terms of being research assistants. I hear from many of my colleagues using AI agents that are very powerful. And so, of course, we might learn about a higher level of intelligence from our own products, but they were all trained on data sets limited to Earth. All of the AI systems that we develop are being trained on experiences here on Earth. And if we find an intelligence that came from another star, that is a completely new experience for us that would expand our horizons and can be very different than what we are used to. So that kind of intelligence, alien intelligence, is very different than artificial intelligence in the sense that it can open our eyes to possibilities that we've never imagined. I call that the unknown unknowns. These are things that we don't even know that we don't know.
Things that we don't know, as you underlined. Avi, thank you for being with us. Avi Loeb, thanks for being with us here at Negocios Televisión once again.
Thanks for having me. I would love to join you anytime.